Hello everybody, welcome back to Making Records with Eric Valentine, that's me. So as you saw from the title, we are going to go back into the W.T.F, Eric Valentine. This will be part 6. I thought it'd be cool to bring this back while I'm running through all of these episodes that are kind of, you know, a lot about construction and other sort of various things. And so this will be a nice way to keep music and recording related things kind of part of the dialogue as we're traveling through that. So, you know, I'm trying to intermix these, and I'd like to get through these questions. Y'all were generous enough to take the time to ask them and submit the questions, and I said I was going to do them all, and I'm going to do them all. And there are a bunch of great questions in here, so, you know, I want to do this and get back into it. I think I got caught up in, you know, when I was doing the YouTube channel stuff before, there was just, you know, kind of some more interesting things that when I had time to do it, there was some other things that I wanted to share. But let's get back into this. I think it's going to be a cool thing to do. So here we go. I'm picking up right where I left off after the last question from round 5. We're going to just dive right back in and just crank a bunch of these out. Let's see what we get. Okay, here we go. So first question is from username LPF. And the question is, on the DFA record, the drums in Caught Up and Statues have unique stereo ambience captured in the ISO booth. Given that the drums and cymbals were recorded separately, do you mix the drum room mics louder than the cymbal room mics to achieve that sound? And was this sound mostly coming from the mics positioned up high? Okay, yeah, good question. And there's another question, but I want to answer this one first while my brain is connected to it. So, I mean, for me, the main advantage of recording cymbals separately when doing drums, because there's things about it that are incredibly clumsy and difficult and sort of a pain in the butt. But there is a huge advantage, and that is that you have free rein to balance the mics around the drums however you want. It can be all room mics. It can be whatever combination, all overheads, all anything, and things don't get overwhelmed by the cymbals, especially when it's in a small space like a drum booth like that. My experience has been, you know, in an enclosed space, there's just nowhere, there's no like volume, air volume for, you know, or a large space for the sound to dissipate in, and it kind of piles up in the room. And so you get a lot of those cymbals just taking over everything, and it can be really, really difficult to get the drums to punch through that, and you just have all these harsh cymbals just kind of swamping everything out. When they're washing everything away, you end up not really hearing the decay of the room sound as much, and it can just really limit your options for being able to feature that in the mix. So that is a huge part of it, being able to use as much of the room mics as I want and not have the cymbals be too loud. And I don't remember specifically if there was more of the room mics in the actual drum mix than there were the cymbal mix. I mean, the other thing that I think is kind of cool about it is, you know, for the cymbal mics, I have sort of like free rein to use whatever blend of microphones, you know, it seems to sound the best. And I like cymbals when they're actually mic'd further away. Sometimes they can be less clangy and ringy sounding. They're just a little more diffused sounding. They can be just blend a little better. I don't remember specifically doing that, but you know, I think I probably would have, you know, leaned more on the room mics, you know, in the for the cymbals as well. And then the last part, okay, was the sound mostly coming from the mics positioned up high, and yes, that's right. There's a pair of C37As way up high in the booth. It was kind of a unique drum booth that you know, the footprint of it is not extraordinarily huge. It's pretty cramped in there once you get a drum set up and you start getting some mics around it. But the ceiling was 16 feet high, and so it gave you a little more air volume, you know, or just by volume I mean actual three-dimensional space, not loudness volume. But so yeah, so there's just more space for the sound to travel in, and so Oh wow, that was crazy sound. Sorry about that. Got distracted. I think there was a bunch of snow falling off the roof here. um, yeah, it's mostly those mics. You know, C37As. One of the things I really love about them, even though they're a condenser mic, they have a really cool punchiness, sort of in the lows and low mids, and they're really cool for room mics. So it's been kind of a favorite of mine for drum room mics, especially in that booth. They seem to really like that booth. Okay, there's a second part to this which says, also, is the main stereo image of the bass guitar in those songs similar to what you described in the Nomad video, in that it's not double tracked apart from a few sections and choruses, but actually a single pass going to the 2 amps via the chorus pedal to achieve the double track sound. Yeah, that is right. So, you know, Jesse has carefully crafted that bass rig, and it is incredible. It's an amazing sound, you know, to really be a finished sound unto itself. And so, you know, there's a PV head that's in one side, and then this acoustic bass amp that's in the other side, and he has this elaborate pedal setup that, you know, has all kinds of, you know, twists and turns in it. But yeah, there is a chorus pedal in there that kind of, you know, divides things up and creates that sort of watery stereo image in it. And so that's primarily what we're using it for. And this is something that I've done a fair amount on lots of other records, where, you know, you can create a stereo guitar sound with multiple amps, and that will get you a certain type of stereo width. And then when there's a moment when you need it to actually widen out more and be more rich sounding, you can basically, you know, as soon as you transition to a doubled guitar, all of a sudden it's just a whole new universe of sort of stereo width for the guitar. I've probably mentioned this before, but the song God of Wine is a really good example of that. That song, we had this huge array of amps set up. We just decided, fuck it, we're here, we have tons of amps and, you know, a lot of these splitter boxes to make it happen. Let's just hook up 6 amps and just see what happens. And so we set up this elaborate thing, and there were 6 amps, and I panned them all different ways, and they all added up to make this one kind of cool, you know, stereo guitar sound in this huge cavernous room at Skywalker Ranch. And it was all the amps were set up so when he pushed his volume pedal forward, that it would break up more, and when he pulled the volume back, it was cleaner, and he could play the clean section of the song. But it was all, you know, one amp setup. And what ends up happening is he plays a majority of it, and I think when it goes into the second verse, all of a sudden, boom, it gets stereo, and instead of having the array of amps as the stereo image, I take the initial pass, put it all to one side, and then a new pass gets panned to the other side, and it just gets wider and richer. Just a way to just continually sort of have the song grow, you know, as you travel through the song. So that's a good example of that trick. You know, the song No One Knows, the Queens of Stone Age song, similar thing in that. So like in the verses of, it's just this one, it, you know, was a collection of probably 3 guitar amps that were, you know, arranged into a stereo sound that played through the verses, and then in the choruses, dun 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 dun, boom, dun 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 dun, you know, like then the doubles come in, and all of a sudden you're in a whole new, you know, realm of stereo guitar goodness there. So it's a great trick, you know, where you're not sort of stuck with just this mono guitar when it's only one guitar playing. You have some stereo width, but when you need to expand on that, the double is a cool way to get there. So cool questions. I hope that was helpful for you. Okay, let's see what we got next here. Okay, so this is username Jimmy W. Hi, Eric. Questions on gating drums. How much will you gate a snare drum? Till there's no other sounds whatsoever. Sometimes I find myself over-gating stuff. The tail getting cut out, for one. I saw the video of you delaying the gate on room mics, or is it overheads? It was room mics. Typically, I would do that on room mics. And that blew my mind. I didn't know there's actually so many things you can do to gate drums. By the way, Drum Sounds on Bad Rain on the Slash record is incredible. How did you EQ, compress it? Would love to know. Thanks, and please keep doing these videos. Okay, so gating on drums, unless I'm actually going for a gating effect where you really are exaggerating the gating of the drums to make it sound more mechanical and stuff. I always try, to use like the range control on the gate, basically how many dB it gets turned down when the gate is not triggered to be open. So you can have it only turn down 6 dB or 12 dB or all the way, and have it turn off. I always try to just do only as much as I need in order to sort of bring out the focus and punch in the primary, like kick and snare impacts, and not have things get sort of washed out into this just kind of continuous mush of drum sound. And there's, if the cymbals are being played at the same time, there's always the constant battle of trying to keep the cymbals under control. So, I definitely don't always just like leave the range all the way down to infinity and have it cut it off. And I think the risk of that is it starts to sound unnatural or just it starts to sound really mechanical. You can kind of lose the fluidity of the performance and the effortless flow of what's being played when things are being chopped in and out all the time. And it'll, I think it can make things just sound a bit just more like a sampled drum kit, which I guess if you're going for that, that's a good thing. But most of the time, I'm trying to make it still sound like a human being in a room playing drums, just like a kind of supersonic version of that, a hyper, exaggerated, like extra punchy version, but it's still a real person playing drums. So, okay, there's gate the drums, and then, okay, yeah, so the Bad Rain drum sound, I really enjoyed that drum sound too. That one came together in kind of a cool way. So this was in an era when I was using the first version of the Unfair Child, which was distinctly different in one particular way. It used different Varimute tubes. So instead of using the 6386s that were used in the original Fairchild, and then we switched back to them when they became available again in the Mark II of the Unfair Child, this first version of the Unfair Child used 6 BC8s. They're also a Varimute type tube, but they're a little more aggressive sounding, and that first version, had some things about it that were really incredible. And that drum sound in particular, basically all the compression you're hearing is that first generation Unfair Child. I got a drum mix and compressed it through that thing, and everything just kind of fell into place in a pretty wonderful way. The Fairchilds in general have this thing where when you get it right and it's grabbing the right way, it adds this like extra kind of thunk to the impact of the drums. It's sort of an artifact in just the tube trying to keep up with what's going on, and that was a really good example of it on that particular song. And so, there was some individual EQ on close mics and the kick drum. I probably was shaping the kick drum and stuff, and I was also probably paralleling the kick drum a little bit, where I was setting the compression pretty heavy with the Unfair Child, and mostly really making the snare drum impact right, and just bring out the ambience and the aggressiveness of the drums. But typically when I do that, I can never get enough kick drum to come through, and so I would probably send an extra signal of the kick drum that gets blended in after the Unfair Child, so I can basically have as much kick drum as I want in the mix without the Unfair Child over compressing it. So I don't remember specifics about EQing it, but I'm usually like doing a lot of shaping for the low end on the kick drum to try and like make it a little deeper but still be really punchy. There's a sort of standard move where you kind of pull out a bunch of low mids. That's very common for me. And yeah, I don't remember any real specific details about the EQing, but the compression I do. That I think sometimes when you're able to get all of the compression out of one device, it's everything just kind of glues together in a really, really cool way. And that was one of the best examples of that. I think everything just kind of was lucky on that one, and it all worked out. So yeah, I think that was it. All right, there you go. Hopefully there's some helpful stuff there for you. Okay. I'm just gonna apologize in advance for some of these name pronunciations. I'm gonna do my best here. I apologize if I completely mangle your name. Okay, so this is username MD Hazdik. Hope that's close to the right pronunciation. Okay, thanks for the videos. Okay. Certainly in the beginning, I guess you had to record things you didn't like. If so, how did you get through these projects without getting insane? That's a really good question. Yeah, I did a lot of that. I started off recording when I was very young, built a studio in a garage when I was, just barely 16. And I was just studio guy for hire. Just came with the garage studio, and people paid, I don't know, I think it was originally, like $12 an hour or something. It was back in the 80s. And pretty much anything and everything walked through that garage door, and some of it was unbelievably terrible. And I think for me, when the music was not, creatively or artistically satisfying or didn't really resonate for me, I would just focus more on the technical side. So, because I really enjoy the engineering side of it as well, and I would just try, like the challenge for me at that point was like, regardless of how bad I may have thought this song might be, or this singer might be, or whatever, I want to try and contrast how bad that is with how good it sounds. Let's see if we can make this the best sounding bad music you've ever heard in your life. And I would just focus on the part of it that I felt like I would really be able to, get the result that would be satisfying for me. There's some things that you just don't have any control over. If you're a person that's really, really, really attached to the song and find it very difficult to enjoy the experience, if it's not a song that really resonates or speaks to you, then that can be really hard. You probably focus more on songwriting. But I've always had that engineering thing to sort of fall back on. So if I'm not in love with the song, that's cool. I'm going to try and get the best kick drum sound ever, and I'll just satisfy myself that way. So I think that was really my workaround in those instances. I think that the thing there was no great solution for is if the person themselves was not pleasant to be in the room with. There's not a lot you can do about that, and there was some of that. You do your best to try and endear yourself to people and have a good time. I don't like to just try and make a good recording. I like to enjoy the experience as well, because it's like, this is what I did all day, every day, and if I'm not enjoying it, then I'm just not enjoying my life, and so it was important for me to enjoy it, and there's very, very few, only rare occasions where somebody was really, really just like, unrecoverably unpleasant in the room, and it's a bummer. That's a hard one to get through, and it not much you can do about it. But yeah, all the other stuff, I just focus on making cool sounds, That's what I was mostly there to do. So okay, so yeah, maybe that'll help you. Okay, next one. This is username Moro Zaltron. I hope I got that right. Have you worked on anything not audio music related in your life? You know what? I don't think so. I made this transition very early on, and it was kind of out of necessity. I mean, the only other real job that I had along the way was I had a paper route. I was a paper boy. I rode around on my bike and threw papers onto people's porches. And I did that for a while. Then I had a job working in a music store. I mean, I started playing music when I was very young. I got my first drum set when I was 4 or 5 years old and was just obsessed from the get-go. It's all I wanted to do all the time. And so I was already like on that path very early on. And so after the paper route, I did get a job in a local sort of mom and pop music store called Draper's in Palo Alto. And I did that for, I forget how long, maybe 6 months, but it couldn't have been more than a year, somewhere between 6 months and a year, and where I was working for somebody else. And, I was there to just, whatever, I'd sell stuff occasionally. I was, not an experienced salesperson. There were other people that had been there a lot longer, and I was quite young. So I was more like emptying trash cans and cleaning the bathroom type stuff. But it put me in a room with music equipment and stuff, and and that's kind of where I wanted to be. But I realized pretty quickly that it was tough. Working for somebody else was not easy for me. There was a few times where it's like if your boss was having a bad day, then you were going to have a bad day, and that I just couldn't. I don't know. I just couldn't handle that. And so after that, I kind of realized like. I pretty much have to do my own thing, for better or worse. I'm either going to end up living in a dumpster or I'm going to make this work. And thankfully, it worked out, in some form or another. And I'm not living in a dumpster because, boy, I was not good at working for other people. So sort of forced me down the path that I took. Okay, so. Let's see, maybe more detail on the Queens of the Stone Age miking process. I'll just try and blaze through some recollections about it here. I've talked about it a fair amount. I know the one episode where I really got into it got pulled down, so I can't pull up any pictures or anything. Yeah, and we. The drums are, as I was discussing recently, a lot of it was in that drum booth. I'm just sort of looking ahead here. And so there is yet another question about Queens of the Stone Age drums right after this. So I think I'll be able to sort of put these all together. Most all of the drums were done, cymbal separate, and so it allowed me to have like microphones further from the drums. So there were no close mics on the toms. They were just like left drum kit, center drum kit, and right drum kit. The left and right were AKG C12As. The center was this. This CMV3. It's an extremely old Neumann condenser mic. It's sort of questionably, some people call it the Hitler mic, unfortunately, because there was footage of Hitler giving speeches through this microphone. It's been around that long. I think the first version was in the late 30s, and it was around in the 40s and around for that whole era. So that was the center drum mic. As I just mentioned, just like on the Death from Above, I had the C37As up high in the room. There was what is called a salt shaker mic on the snare drum. I also had this little speaker that I would hang off of one of the lugs, and it would just sort of face into the shell of the drum. Just a little like 4-inch speaker, and using it in the same way that people would use an NS10 speaker as a microphone on the kick drum. And this was just a smaller speaker, and it would pick up this sort of knockiness in the snare drum. I was using it a lot in that era, in the sort of early 2000s. I'd always just throw it on the snare and just have it to blend in and give this little sound on the snare. So that was in there. The kick drum was, I think, an RE20. I believe it was a dynamic, and then I also had a speaker on there, and at this time I had a passive monitor wedge that had a cool, you know, as soon as I discovered the whole NS10 thing, I was like, well, we should try all the speakers. Let's see, you know, if any of these other ones are cool on the kick drum. And so we found this one, you know, monitor speaker that had a 12-inch speaker in it, and it was really cool on the kick drum. So we were using that on the kick drum. And let's see, what else was in there? I think that was it. That was it. We had 16 tracks. We were recording, you know, drums, bass, and guitar all at the same time. So I had to keep it somewhat limited. Sometimes I would have, you know, typically I would have like a just a mono drum set mic that was a little further away somewhere, just to pick up, you know, a mono version of the drum kit, maybe up behind him or something. I don't remember any details about what that mic might have been, but I'm guessing that was probably in there somewhere. So that was drum stuff. Boy, the guitars were challenging on this one. Man, you know, we were using a lot of amps that were not guitar amps. They're bass amps, or, you know, broken PV amps, or anything that wasn't conventional, you know. And so sometimes it was hard to pull a sound out of those things. And so I ended up just putting up kind of everything, just in the hopes that something would like grab something out of this amp that sounded cool, and start blending things and have mics close up and far away. I mean, you know, it was a lot of experimentation for the guitar stuff. I don't know if you did get a chance to see the one episode that I posted about. There were some pictures in there, and you could see, you know, the news conference in front of those guitar amps. Like, there was just a million mics in front of there, and I would just try and pull stuff up in combinations that would sound cool. And so typically, you know, I'd have a condenser. You know, I do like a U87 or U67 on guitars, pretty great sound. Have some dynamics on there, but it would always be something weird, just to sort of try and stay consistent with the desire to be unconventional on the record. Josh was very, very much into, you know, steering clear of convention, you know, try and have things be unique. I love that about his approach, you know. And so we were trying like salt shaker mics on the amps. Those things are these 633As is the model number, and they were made by a few different companies. They were branded by Altec, Western Electric, and Northern Electric. All made the 633A salt shaker mic. You know, on the snare drum, the one that I was using was a Northern Electric one, which is like this sort of light powder blue color. On the guitars, we were probably using Altec or Western Electric ones. And let's see, what else did we put on those things? A lot of times it was too loud for ribbon mics. And so, yeah, it was just like, you know, endless experimentation, trying to pull that stuff together. Then on the bass, there was a combination of amps. So there was an SVT that was just kind of turned all the way up, with the mid-range turned all the way up, that was just kind of distorting or super growly. And that was going into this pair of dual 15 bass cabinets that they got from some other artist. I forget who it was, but, you know, some other artist had used them to tour with, and then, you know, unloaded them, and they got them. And what they would do, they would point the two cabinets facing each other, and then put a mic in the middle of it. and in this case, I believe it was an 87 or a 67 in between them, and it was like the loudest thing in the universe, like in between those cabinets. If you just imagine an SVT amp turned literally all the way up with two cabinets facing each other, converging like in this like point of audio singularity for the microphone in the middle that was just being crushed under the weight of all of this sound pressure. But that was part of the sound, you know. And it was cool. It was interesting to me because it never, once you heard it in the control room, it was never quite as, you know, epic sounding as it was in the room. When you stood in the room with all of that volume, it was like, this is the craziest sound I've ever heard in my life. And then you pull it up in the control room, and without all that volume, it was just kind of like, rah, 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 you know. But it was still a cool sound. And then the one thing that was truly extraordinary as part of the bass stuff, and so there were two other amps that were always being blended in for the bass stuff, and one of them was like a small combo. I would use either like a small, I had a little Gibson like GA5, or this little Vox AC15 type amp, something that would have a little more like a crunchy attack for a little bit of detail in there. And then there was, a lot of people have heard about this, but this little PV Decade amp, which was minuscule. It was tiny, and it wasn't particularly loud, so we isolated it in one of the booths. And when I discovered that when you put a Coles 4038 ribbon mic right up on it, it got the most extraordinary low end. It was just wild. And so that amp was really responsible for a lot of the very cool, super subby low end in that bass sound getting blended in. So that was one miking thing that was, I think, you know, kind of a cool discovery, and very, very unconventional. Okay, so there's one more thing in here. I hope that's enough miking stuff. Oh, I should do some vocal stuff real quick. For the vocals, for Josh, we were always using two microphones, sort of like a hi-fi mic and a lo-fi mic. And so I had my Telefunken 251 that would be up as sort of the hi-fi mic, and then we would also, like, right just head-to-head, we would have some sort of like old ribbon mic or something that was just kind of dirtier and more lo-fi, and we could blend the two to, you know, try and figure out how clean or dirty we wanted the vocals to be. So that was one sort of cool, technique that was used on the record. And yeah, other than that, yeah, that's a good overview of that stuff. So then, loudness while mixing, quiet, loud bass check, etc. Yeah, okay. Well, I think you kind of answered it there. But yeah, I mostly tend to mix quiet, and I do turn it up at times just to try and feel some low end in the room. That's important for me. You know, there's got to be a point where I can just turn it up and it just feels satisfying. It's always been difficult for me to get a sense of that when you don't have volume in the room. But I can't mix like that all day. It's definitely a little too fatiguing. And then the only other thing that I've done is that if I want the end result to be brighter, I force myself to keep the mix volume down, because I will mix brighter when it's quieter in the room. And if I know it's something that I want to be able to listen to really, really loud, and not be harsh on my ears, then I'll mix it louder. And it'll force me to tuck in offending frequencies so people can just crank it up and enjoy it. An example of that is the Death from Above record. We all agreed in the mixing process on that like, we want this to be a record that people listen to loud, and so I mixed it loud to try and make sure that it would just be satisfying, you know, when it's cranked up. So yeah, so there you go. There's some specific, you know, circumstances where I'll do one or the other, but most of the time I mix pretty quiet, you know. Yeah, probably not much louder than talking volume. And, and I find that if I get in the habit of trying to make it sound, feel more exciting by turning it up, that I have a point down the road where I go like, okay, I got to start over now. I was just lying to myself with volume. That didn't work, So there you go. There's mixed volume stuff. Okay, so here's some more Queens of Stone Age drum stuff, and there's a couple things that are specific that I didn't cover. So this is username Earl of Baltimore. I think I can pronounce that correctly. My question is regarding another track on Songs for the Deaf. You mentioned in the No One Knows video, I guess this person was able to catch that, that Dave Grohl just came in and laid down tracks fairly spontaneously. Is this also true of Song for the Dead? In my opinion, that song is a great showcase for Grohl's talent, confirming what a precision monster he is behind a kit. Yeah, I agree. He is as good as drummers get, man. That guy is incredible. Okay, so Dave Grohl's drums on that record were recorded in 2 chunks. I think I've talked about this before, but in case it got deleted or pulled down or something, this is what happened. The original plan was that Dave was going to play on 3 songs on the record. And then the touring drummer in the band at the time, a guy named Gene Troutman, who's also a great drummer, was going to play on the rest of the record. And so for the first 3 songs, Dave Grohl actually did come to a rehearsal space and rehearse those songs with Queens. And they were generally pretty quick rehearsals. They would just play through them a few times and just get the general idea for it. And, Dave is a quick study for sure on the drums and doesn't need a lot of, rehearsing or whatever, studying to figure out how to play a song well. And I don't think it was particularly exhaustive, the rehearsal. And so for those first 3 songs, he was a bit more prepared for those, for the song Song for the Dead. And interestingly, for those first 3 songs, those songs were not recorded in the drum booth. And so Josh had a thing that he had done more where the drums were in the room, but they would build sort of a fort around it, around the drums. And so we did more of that approach for those first 3 songs. And it wasn't until after that round when I thought, let's just go further with this and just put the drums in the booth, and really have it feel claustrophobic. I thought it would be cool for that. And so for those first 3, he was out in the big room just with some blankets and stuff, a little sort of fort built around him. And then same thing though, but he did the drum pass and then overdub cymbals. And so then, so after that, then they came back to do another round of tracking basics with Gene, and that's when we transitioned into doing the drum booth. And so Gene was playing, and that is a tall order to step in and start tracking drums after 3 songs of Dave Grohl tracking. It was just really a difficult transition to make because Gene is a great drummer, but I think some of it was psychological. Dave brings just a certain energy and confidence where he could kind of spar with Josh and Nick in a way that Gene just, wasn't up to, I think. And so, Gene just, or Dave just did not take any fucking shit from Josh and Nick at all, like none whatsoever. And, there were times when, like Dave would get up and have to, take a bathroom break, and and they would start giving him shit, which was common within the sort of dynamic of the band, and be like, "Come on, Grohl, stop fucking holding us up," They start giving him shit as he's walking out the door, and as he's walking out the door, he would just raise his hand up and with a little fuck you and just say, Nirvana, bitch, and walk out the door. And so he just didn't take any shit from them at all. And I think it just created a different dynamic in the room, you know, where Dave just had this, like, you know, confidence and assertive quality to him that I think is very beneficial when you're the drummer, sort of like driving, you know, the song along. And so if you're a drummer showing up in the room and going like, is this okay? It's the wrong psychological position to be in. And I think, you know, Gene was kind of more in that position in the band. I think he was kind of newer to the band or whatever. And just didn't have that, like, fuck you kind of attitude in the room. And he just kind of got steamrolled and things just kind of fell apart a little bit. And at a certain point, you know, Josh and I had a conversation. We're like, you know, should we just try and have Dave do everything? And, you know, it was kind of hard to not want to do that. So the decision was made, and we asked Dave to come back in. And when he came back in, there really wasn't time for rehearsing beforehand because Dave's a busy dude. And so we set up 2 rooms. So we had like a rehearsal setup in Studio B at Barefoot Recording. There was a small, you know, tracking room for Studio B. And so they were set up in there. He had an extra drum kit in there. And so as I was setting up and dialing in drum sounds for the next song, and at this point the arrangements had already been pretty well hashed out, and so it was really mostly just Dave learning the songs. They would be rehearsing the song. I would be getting the drums like tuned and doing my sort of nerdy like tuning to the key of the song shit and whatever adjustments I wanted to make. There were some relatively dramatic changes in the drum setup. There was a lot of stuff that was done in the drum booth. There were some songs like the God Is in the Radio or Another Love Song. Like those songs were done out in the big room and were just a different sound. And so there were some, like, you know, fairly significant setup changes. And so that gave them time to rehearse stuff. So by the time I had everything set up ready to go, David learned the song. He'd run out and we'd track the next song. And so that's kind of the way it went. Once I was like, okay, I think I got it, I'd start editing together the master. They'd go rehearse other stuff. And so we would just kind of trade off that way. And anytime I had something that created downtime for the band, they wouldn't just hang out. They'd go and rehearse whatever song was going to be recorded next. So that's how it went on the rest of it. And, you know, let's see. I think I may be sort of combining this with another question later, but he did play, you know, pretty, you know, spontaneously. There was a lot of improvisation, and which made it especially difficult when overdubbing the cymbals, because, you know, it wasn't really like a totally mapped out thing. He knew where the changes were, and he knew, I'm going to play this drum beat here, I'm going to play that drum beat there. But sometimes, you know, the drum fills or transitions were kind of more free form, and sometimes there were whole sections that were a lot more free form, and he would just fuck around and do whatever. And there's some portions of it that were really difficult with the cymbal overdubs. So yeah, there you go. That was the sort of Dave Grohl drum experience. He is awesome. Okay, so here we go. Here's the next one. Okay, so this is user Sonar35, so I'm guessing Sonar Drums. Hi, Eric, thanks for these videos. They are super inspiring and just awesome. In the past, you have talked about one mic drum recording. Would you be able to go over that in more detail? Mic's placement, overall approach. Thanks again. Okay, yeah. So the thing that I've sort of settled on for that is, you know, if you have like a 4-piece drum set up, a rack tom, snare drum, floor tom, the positioning of the drums and cymbals becomes kind of important. So, you know, there'll be like a crash cymbal over here, and the hi-hat. I'm a right-handed drummer, and then instead of putting the ride cymbal here, right in between the rack tom and floor tom. I try to push the ride cymbal and any other crash cymbal off to the right further, so you have this open space right in between the rack tom and the floor tom to get that one microphone in. And for me, it has become like the most balanced position, because you get an equal helping of the rack tom and the floor tom, the snare drum, you get some of the batter side of the kick, and then, you know, just with EQ and sort of trickery, I can get some real cool low end out of the kick drum. But that is my favorite spot for just like a one mic drum kit thing, if you're going for more of a close-up drum sound. And then beyond that, it's you know, it's been about just like finding a cool place in the room. And you know, every room is different. It depends where you put the drum kit in the room. It depends where the mic is in the room. And so I just sort of fuss around with it until I find a place where, for me, it's all about getting that fundamental low end of the snare drum, of the kick drum, of the toms, whatever, to really speak in that microphone. If you don't get the punch of the drum in the low end, it's just going to be kind of a thin, harsh drum sound, and you just got to find that spot in the room. If you don't get that, then the cymbals just kind of overwhelm everything, because the real meat of the drums, you know, will not have enough sort of presence in that mic when it's that far away to compete with cymbals and stuff. And then, of course, like the way you play the drums becomes everything as well. Like, if you don't play with a good internal balance of the drum kit, you know, it really doesn't work with one microphone, because you can't change it. So, so yeah, those are kind of the most important things for me. Hopefully that's helpful. All right, so then here is Chad Benson. Here's the question part. Okay, when did you start to feel like your mixes and engineering made a turning point, be that years or a certain project? Yeah, that's an interesting question. You know, there was a particular point where I felt like, okay, I think, you know, I kind of have a thing, you know. And the first time that I think I really pinned it down was, oddly enough, this one-off song that was with Joe Satriani. And so it's a song called Time, and it ended up on, I believe, his Crystal Planet record. And so that particular song was an outtake from an earlier record. I believe the Surfing with the Alien record. Never was able to finish it in a way that worked for him. And so my band T-Ride toured with Joe Satriani. We kind of became friends. And so after that, when he was gearing up to make another record, we also had the same management, Bill Graham management. And so they thought, hey, you know, you guys should get together and see if it, you know, would work for you guys to make a record together. And so as a starting point, he gave me that master and said, just see what you can do with this. And so while he was still out playing shows, I got the master. I played drums to it, I played bass to it, played like dulcimer and some percussion and all kinds of stuff. And then he came in and played a new solo over the end section. And it worked out really well. He was really excited about the results. And so then we ultimately set out to make a whole record together using that kind of same approach, where it was mostly just me and him, and then we'd bring in other musicians at times to sort of complete, you know, a collection of people to play or whatever. And ultimately, I didn't end up finishing that record, but you know, but that song Time, it was when I really felt like I was getting things to translate the way I wanted to, like the impact in the kick drum and the compression on the snare drum, and the whole thing was coming together in a way that was like, this is a thing, you know. And then coming off of that was when I segued into the Third Eye Blind album. And there was, that Joe Satriani recording was one of the things that was being listened to. It was like, wow, we like this kind of drum sound, and we think this will be cool for our record. And so it's one of the reasons I think they came in to do some demos with me, was because of that recording. And so then ultimately the Third Eye Blind record was mixed at the same studio, the site, where I mixed the Joe Satriani record. The site was the same record that I took Queens of the Stone Age to try and, have minimize the drug parties. And so that was a place that I had had some great success mixing. And so I think that was it. I think that was the first one. There were some little like demos and things that I'd done on my own, some little instrumental recordings. I was always experimenting and trying to see if I could recreate, John Bonham drum sounds and stuff like that. But that Joe Satriani thing was the first one where it was like, okay, I'm creating a song from scratch. I'm not just copying something else. And it really kind of had a thing that carried over. And, the techniques that were used on that, the use of the distressors and the Orban EQ and things like that, carried on beyond that. So, yeah, that's, if you haven't heard that one, that was sort of the genesis of it. Okay, so this is username Tau Pagan. I'm getting a lot of noise from one of my Octavia MK012 mics. What do you suspect might be the problem? Okay. I'm sorry, I can't really help you with that one. I guess I've never used one of those, but I'm sure it's probably a condenser mic, phantom power. And so if there's an amplifier in there, it's probably the amplifier. If it's creating noise within the microphone, then there's probably a bad transistor or something in there. Okay. Alternatively, what advice would you give someone, laugh aloud, who's trying to use two entirely different mismatched mics for overheads? I think there's some good tricks for this. And first of all, having them mismatched, is not necessarily a bad thing. You can, if you listen to the two sides of When the Levee Breaks, one of arguably maybe the best drum recording of all time, the left and right sides don't sound even a little bit similar. They're wildly different. Like one side is kind of scooped out and is a bunch of low end and high end. The other side is all mid range. And they add up to sort of make this really cool, complete sound, and then it sounds really wide, It's almost like they did this sort of comb filtering stereo width effect, but I think it was either different microphones. Everything I've read said that those were Beyer 160s, and the same microphone on each side, but they sure don't sound like it. I mean, they sound completely different, but in an incredibly cool way. So don't get hung up on the mics needing to sound exactly the same, because the differences in the sound is what will give you stereo width. And if for some reason the differences feel like you're losing focus or things are not adding up right, then there are some cool tricks now. I featured this in an episode about the song Release, where there was a piano mic fumble. The mic sort of drooped down, and I needed to match it to the mic that was still in the correct position, and used, the FabFilter Q3 EQ match to match them up. And that thing is pretty incredible for doing that. And so if you really like the sound of one overhead mic and not so fond of the sound of the other one, I would try EQ matching it to the one that you like. The other thing that I like to do for overheads in general, even if if you're going for an overhead drum sound that is a very balanced stereo image of the whole drums, where you can hear the placement clearly of the hi-hat and the ride cymbal and the tom, the floor tom, all those things, fall into place, but it's still focused. It doesn't have that weird thing where they're kind of like chopped apart. I always like putting the overheads in the middle and doing like an XY thing, when they're sitting next to each other, then the low end of all the drums will be in phase, and when they're pointed apart from each other, the high end is the thing that will create the stereo image. And so the low end punch of the snare drum will be more centered, and everything just feels more anchored in the middle, but you still are able to identify the placement of things. So if your stuff is sounding too disconnected, it's probably because you have mics way outside the drum kit pointing in. And so then the low end information that those mics are picking up is likely very, very different and, kind of out of phase, and it can make things sound kind of, kind of split apart in the stereo field. So there you go. Hope that helps. All right. Question by Pascal Clarat. Hope that pronunciation is good there. Thanks for taking time to read. Answer. Okay. You make extensive, compulsive use of gates on drums when mixing. From what I understood, you do so, A, in order to build the drum character with layers, and B, with a view to maintain control, clarity, and avoid unwanted artifacts, phase issues when compressing and or distorting. Don't you think that it kind of takes away some of the original's performance groove? Could another path be less gates and compression whilst getting the same punch? How and when you are producing, recording, and mixing a record, do you actually make this kind of a trade-off? Have you ever tried spectral editing for getting rid of unwanted bleed? Thanks in advance for your answer. I've experimented with that a little bit, so like a spectral gating or spectral editing type move would be using something like a de-esser on the drums. So when the de-essers that I like were like the DBX S902s, they aren't really just gating high frequencies. What they're doing is listening to the relative balance between lows and highs. And so whenever there's high frequencies, even if they're quiet, that aren't supported by low frequencies, it triggers the de-esser. It's a really smart way to do it. And so that's a really cool trick for when you're trying to reduce the sound. Let's say you have a lot of compression on the drums, and when you meter it, the loudest impacts are going to be the kick and the snare drum. The hi-hat hits are, don't meter anywhere near as loud, and so the kick and snare are getting compressed a lot. The hi-hat's not getting compressed at all, and so the end result is that the hi-hat gets a lot louder. And so that's one cool thing that a de-esser or sort of a spectral editing type thing can do, is it will listen for those moments when the hi-hat is playing by itself and turn it down and counteract what the compression is doing. And in theory, a lot of times what I'm trying to do, and you're right, like when you overgate things, it really can mess with the groove of the drums. And like I explained earlier, you lose the sort of fluidity of the feel of the drums. Things can start sounding kind of choppy and mechanical when it's too gated. And I try to avoid that. Sometimes I may get a little overzealous with my gating, and it may start, getting into that realm of starting to sound a little too choppy. And it's probably because I'm really just battling the harshness of some cymbals or something like that. And, it's a trade-off that I'm willing to make to keep the harshness under control. So the overall thing is just, you can turn up more. And a lot of times the cymbals just eat up so much room in a mix for the detail of an acoustic guitar or so many other things that are trying to occupy that same space. So sometimes it's maybe a trade-off that's worth making. But the idea for me is always, sort of gating the same amount that the compression is doing. So, the compressor, let's say it's every time the snare drum hits, it's turning down 6 dB and then coming back up. What I try and do is the inverse of that with the gate. And so the gate is sort of hovering 6 dB down, and when the snare drum hits, it turns up full volume, so the compressor will compress it. And then the two things, like the gate sort of goes back to being 6 dB down as the compressor is letting off its compression on the release time, if you match them up, then what you end up with is, in theory, a drum mix that has this aggressive compression on it, but the relationship between the impacts of the drums and the room sound and the cymbals and stuff is not really changed. And so, you can only do that if you're not gating things where they cut off. You're gating down to a particular volume. And so that is ideal, in theory, what usually I'm shooting for and what typically gets the best results. Yeah, so maybe I overdo it sometimes, but I think when you get it right, it's pretty great, because everything has that aggressive compression to it, but it doesn't get washed out with cymbals and room sound and start losing the impact of the main hits. So. Good question. Hopefully, my response makes sense. You're asking if the question makes sense. It totally made sense. So hopefully the response does as well. Okay, let's keep going here. I got some more time here. So this is username Run for Buck. Do you take in consideration that more and more people today listen in mono, i.e. single Bluetooth speakers, Sonos, etc.? What are your thoughts on this? And do you have any tricks to make a single mix sound exciting on both a mono and stereo setup? I love LCR mixing, but hate hearing my mixes on a mono speaker, as all the details I've worked so hard for goes down the drain. Yeah, I don't spend a whole lot of time chasing the mono playback. I know that it is happening a little bit more these days with these Bluetooth speakers. I've noticed that. And yeah, I don't know. I like stereo mixing. And I like hearing stuff in stereo. And if it doesn't sound totally exactly perfect in mono, I can live with that. I wouldn't compromise the stereo mix to accommodate a mono translation. One thing that I've been doing more of recently, just because it's a cool feature on the Unfairchild, the Fairchild has like an MS mode, and so I've been using the Unfairchild to widen the mix. And I've been noticing lately that when those mixes go to mono, the balances do get a little bit weird. Because when you widen the stereo mix in that MS type way, things that are hard panned out, have more apparent volume in the mix. And when you collapse it down to mono, they won't have the same apparent volume. I've been noticing that. So on hard pan guitars, a couple recent things that I've done that have that width. And I love the width. It's great. I just have more space to play with in the mix. When it goes to mono, it's like the hard pan guitars or something all of a sudden feel a little light relative to the vocal. But again, I enjoy the results in the stereo version so much that I don't think I want to give it up for the mono version. I don't know. I think at this point there's probably more stereo stuff going on, and so I'm just gonna keep mixing in stereo. So I'm sorry. I don't know that that's extraordinarily helpful, but I guess my answer is F mono. I don't know. It's just I wouldn't compromise the stereo mix for it. Not now. I think mono was something that was substantially more important when everybody was listening on mono home radios and car stereos and stuff, probably most people were listening on mono, then it probably makes a difference. But I would say most people listen on stereo systems now, so I would stick with stereo. Okay, next one is from username Rock City Music. Here are my questions. You seem to be using very little reverb in mixing drums. In all your episodes, you seem to have great room recordings. I often get drum recordings where the room tracks are not so great, drowned in cymbals and mushy. What are your thoughts on getting a great drum ambience without good drum room mic tracks. How would you use reverb plugins for that? Whew, that's challenging. Man, yeah, that is hard to replicate. Drums, the drums being in the room is a very, very specific sound, and I have not found a plugin that actually specifically does that. It doesn't mean that you can't get something that'll be cool. And I've had some luck with some of these, convolution room type thing, impulse response room things. The Ocean Way one is quite cool. Actually, I'm gonna find a time to do this, but I'm gonna mention it in this, and then I'll find a time to feature it and put it up for everybody to check out and make use of. Before Barefoot Recording got shut down, the wonderful and talented Kean Reardon, I think I mentioned him in the analog archiving episode because he had an Adam Smith tape machine synchronizer and saved me with that thing. He went to Barefoot and did impulse responses of all the spaces in that building. It was something I wanted to do and never had time to, and thankfully he did it, and he did an amazing job of it. They are some of the best reverb impulse responses I've used. I was so surprised because so many of them are so disappointing. You get these things that come up and it's like whatever famous room, oh, this is gonna be incredible. I get to have super duper room, and you put it on and just like, really? That's what that sounds like, But these ones, I was just stunned. So he did the chamber, the big room, he did stuff under the drumbrella, he did stuff in the drum booth that I just talked about for Queens of the Stone Age, he did stuff in the Studio B room. There's tons of stuff, and they're really, really cool. And you get some really cool kind of like aggressive, thick, ambiances for drums. So I will post that, and that might be something that's helpful for this. But I think that's probably your best bet. Either actually doing it for real, put a speaker in a room, and mic the room, instead of trying to use a plugin, or go for plugins that are derived that way, that are impulse responses of rooms. There is one other really cool trick that people used to do a long, long time ago, that I did a long, long time ago, and it's pretty incredible. I haven't thought about this for a long time. Oh my God, I'm gonna have to do this again. Okay, so glad you asked this question. So what you do is you take a 12-inch speaker of some sort, not in a cabinet or something like that, just a standalone speaker. It can be like a guitar speaker, bass speaker, whatever. Maybe you can try a 15-inch speaker, and you lay a snare drum on top of it, and you can even sort of like clamp it down to the speaker so it's not like bouncing around on there, and then send the snare drum mic of the recording to that speaker, and essentially the speaker is just activating the drum and hitting the drum, and you get the sound of the drum in the room going, and so it's not just a speaker trying to play back the sound, it's an actual snare drum being activated by the impact of the drum that was recorded. And it's pretty incredible because you get the real sound of the snares, bouncing off the bottom head in that room. And, you can blend that in, and I think it might give you a really cool, much more realistic result, at least for having a cool ambience on the snare drum. So, oh my God, I haven't thought about that for a long time. That's a cool, fun trick. So please try that and tell me how it works out. I hope it works for you, man. It's a cool one. Okay, you got one more question here. On most of the songs you deconstructed, you use the Unfairchild on the stereo bus. What would be your plug-in alternative to get a similar sound and feel for the mix? Okay, yeah, this is an easy one. I think I featured it in the Slash by the Sword deconstruction. I hope I'm remembering all these names and models and stuff correctly, but it's the Cush Audio AR1 compressor. That is the best emulation of a tube compressor I've heard. So if I'm trying to replicate what the Unfairchild does on a vocal or on a mix or on a drum mix, that is the plugin I use. That thing is fucking great. Really, really cool sounding plugin. Good job over there at Cush. I think his name is Gregory over there. Man, that guy's really, really good. He knows what he's doing. Okay, yeah, hopefully that's helpful. I highly recommend that plugin. Okay. This is username Mr. Jumbo Blimp Jumbo. Acoustic treatment. In your opinion, which company's products are worth their salt and which are snake oil? Or perhaps, which ones did you find had the most bang for your buck? Can you tell us about the most important tools lying around your studio? Ergo, dB meter, drum dial, maybe things you bring with you when you record in someone else's studio. I'm also interested in anything you want to share about UTA gear. Love the channel. Okay. Yeah, good question. Oh, I'm so deep in this right now. It's going to take a little while for these episodes to catch up to where I am right now. I know there's a little time dilation going on, but I'm going to do 2 of these a week of the progress of building the studio, and then you'll catch up to real time as I'm actually really finishing it. But today, literally today, I was in the control room. I finally put the big Strauss monitors in the room. I put up all the acoustic treatment in the room. Finally got to hear some stuff. And I'm doing a very unique acoustic treatment thing I've never done before. There's versions of this that have been around for a long time. The version that I'm doing is specifically unique. I've only heard about it from one person, which is the guy Jürgen Strauss, who designed the speakers that I bought and I'm putting in there. Okay, let me answer the first part, okay, before I get into this other stuff that I'm just too excited about it. So if you're trying to just get rid of sort of like splashy, reflective stuff in a room, that's very easy. You can put up anywhere from 2 to 3 to 4 inches of some sort of soft material. It can be foam, it can be mineral wool, it can be fiberglass, whatever you want to put in your room. All of that stuff works great. And will absorb everything from whatever, 500 hertz and up, depending on how thick it is, There's this thing called the quarter waveform rule, where you need 1/4 the length, the waveform of soft material in order to absorb that waveform. That becomes a big problem when you get into lower frequencies. Let's say, 50, 60 hertz is like, I don't know, 16 feet long or something like that. And so 1/4 of that is 4 feet. You need 4 feet of soft stuff to absorb that frequency. Nobody's going to put 4 feet of stuff on their walls. There's no room for you to be in the room anymore. So that is a challenging thing. And I see a lot of people out there advertising that this is a bass trap and all it is 4 inches of soft material. In my experience, that is definitely not a bass trap. It's not even close to a bass trap. It's not going to really grab stuff in any meaningful way below maybe 200 hertz, And so when I'm in a room, and I used to be very confused by this stuff, like having problems way down at 60 or 40 or 50 hertz and stuff, and put up a thing that's supposed to be a bass trap, and it does nothing, absolutely nothing. It's like, what the F, But that's why the quarter waveform rule is super real. Like that doesn't lie. The one that does work, I've talked about a lot, I'm still using them now, is tube traps. There is something unique about tube traps, that there's a void in the middle and it creates some sort of pressure gradient inside there that is uniquely efficient for absorbing low frequencies. And so tube traps, I believe, actually do what they're saying they're going to do. And ASC makes the best version of them. They're the most efficient. They're just really expensive. It's kind of a bummer. I made my own, and they're not particularly difficult to make. The stuff, and each one ends up costing more in the like $100 to $200 range, something like that. I think those are totally worthwhile. So if you're having low end issues in your room, if you take tube traps and put them in the front corners of the room, where your speakers are, you will see a difference in the frequency response. Down in the ranges that matter, down in like whatever, 50, 60, 80, all down in there. You probably need some pretty big diameter ones to reach way, way down there, but tube traps do definitely work. Okay, so then here's the thing. I'm going to sort of give this away a little bit. So what I'm doing in my new control room, because I was originally just going to line the whole thing with tubes. Just like tubes everywhere. But that's a tough thing to try and squeeze into a room. It definitely takes up a lot of space. I'd lose like 2 feet in each dimension of the room. And so I found this thing, and it was really on the advice of Jürgen Strauss, the speaker designer, that there are these panels that you can buy. There's a company in Germany that makes them. And then when I researched it more, there are some people in the US that are making them. But it's a combination of soft material and then a steel plate, a resonating plate. And the way it works is that the resonating plate will resonate at low frequencies, and then that energy gets absorbed into the soft material that's behind it. And so you can have a panel that's only like 6 inches deep that, according to this company Rens that builds them, it is what they call open window or 100% absorption all the way down to 60 hertz. Like, that is incredible. So I built these things. I bought ones that would go on the ceiling because the construction of that I thought was going to be too complicated. Turned out it wasn't. We'll get into all that later. And then I built the ones that go on the wall according to Jürgen's specification. And I'm here to say that those things are pretty incredible. As I was testing them in the room, I've given this away. I'm just too excited about it. But I think there'll still be enough to check out once we get there in the progression of all this. So here's the tease. It's basically, had a speaker in front of the front wall and put just 4 inches of foam, and there was an issue in the frequency response. There's big cancellation. Put just 4 inches of foam behind the speaker, pretty much does nothing, like I've experienced. Like these absorbers that are in here, these are 4-inch absorbers. Didn't do anything for the low end in this room. And then you add the metal sheet on top of this 4-inch piece of foam, and all of a sudden, like in one case, it reduced that cancellation by 9 dB. That is a huge difference. And so I'm really, really excited about these things. Like, to me, this is unquestionably the way to go. Because with a very, very limited amount of space, you can get a massive amount of absorption way, way, way down. And so the frequency range where this cancellation was happening was way down. It was at 100 hertz. It's not like way down the sub range, but like still, 4 inches of foam did nothing to 100 hertz. I put this piece of metal on there. Oh my God, it was like insane magic. So. It's going to be a while from now. I'm going to get into those, show you how I built them. I've been documenting it a bunch because I didn't know if this was going to work or not, but it turns out it did. Just another sort of giveaway. Like today, for the first time, I got to hear the big Strauss monitors in the new control room with all of these. There's like 32 of these custom-made panels, plus all the ceiling panels that I purchased from this place in Germany and had them shipped. It was just insane. This room sounds unbelievable. unbelievable. It sounds so incredible. Oh, me and Alex Proctor is helping me right now, and we were just in there just freaking out, you know, listening to it in the room. It's amazing. So we will get there, and I'll be able to show all of that stuff. This is probably a good time to wrap up this round of W.T.F, Eric Valentine. Thank you so much for all of the amazing, wonderful questions, taking the time to ask them, taking the time to watch the YouTube channel. I'm just having fun being back in it. I hope you're enjoying it, and I will see you on the next episode. Bye.